Welcome back to another episode of Crushing Canaan. I am Seth Varnadore, joined by my brother, Pastor Nate Varnadore. Nathan, I hope you're doing very well this lovely morning.
I am. It's a
We
beautiful
still,
45 degrees out there.
it's a balmy 60 something, maybe 70 here. It's tough.
That's cold for you.
Yeah. So we haven't gotten any, I've not seen any questions of the week of a silly nature. We've gotten a couple people asking questions that are actually pretty good, but not of my normal early question of the week. So, like I said last week, the beatings will continue
I don't
until
believe in
morale
purgatory,
improves.
but if I did,
It'd be the
if
start
I
of this
did, this
podcast.
would be, I just cringe. I need,
Well, here we go. So,
we screen the topics, but this, I don't.
yeah, I don't
I
tell
need
Nathan
to
what the
talk.
questions are going to be. So, these are straight off the top of his head, so you can really get a good idea how he thinks.
Yeah.
Okay, so here's my question for this week.
All right.
And we're still talking about, we kind of did our How to Read the Bible series. Today, we're going to talk about, a way to look. You kind of laid out what your plan would be, which was read the Gospels, read the New Testament, then go read the Old Testament, right? So my question is, right, we're talking about reading the Bible. Do you have to have, or do you think everyone should have a physical copy of the Bible? What if somebody says, I have my Bible, I read it on my phone, I read it on my Kindle?
I don't dismiss when people interact with their Bible by phone. I get it. I am old school. I'm an old soul. I think there's just something about having a tangible physical Bible. I've had many appointments with people who've walked in my office and say, I'm trying, and I highlight in this app and I do this. And I said, but how often do you actually interact with the text outside of highlighting or, whatever you can get in the Bible app? And they go, well, I don't know. I don't have a hard copy. And the retention that people have having a physical Bible is vastly different. I think you should have one because, again, I don't trust technology. I mean, it's a tool, but a book, all I need is sunlight and I'm good. Power goes out, phone dies. I'm a big proponent of having physical book. That and Fahrenheit 451, reading that when I was younger made me more defiant. Like, yeah, we need books.
Lord. Well, just, listening to certain things on like the creation of the Bible and things like that, that early Christians were like one of the first to push books and kind of putting things together in one spot instead of kind of the scrolls, like individual scrolls. And then, right, the first thing ever printed on a printing press was a Bible. Yep. Right. So I think there's something to a physical copy. I like you said, it's the same way as like in school, they made you, if it was your word of the week or whatever, your spelling words you wrote them down. The act of writing things down contributes to memory. Yeah. So I think interacting with it in that way, whereas I can just kind of, I'm going to highlight that. 750 people have highlighted this passage, and you can just click on it. That's less interactive, right? So
they both have their strengths. To me, a majority of people interact with books. It is a different form of interacting. And I know we'll end up doing something about it later, but the adults I interact with many times when they say I'm struggling with retention of reading my Bible or anything like that, a lot of times it's because they're trying to do it electronically because they do everything else on there.
Yeah.
Versus, okay, crack it open, highlight, box, underline, whatever strategies works for you in doing that. So, yeah.
And I think
that's my preference.
If you've listened to any of our shows previous, and if you haven't, please go back. You kind of talked about some of the ways you like to read and go through it, and it does involve a lot of notation, circling things. Yeah. And I would agree that I think it's, I see people use the phone in church, and maybe that's, there's nothing wrong with that if you're just, you want to read along with the message. But it seems like for individual study, a physical copy would be superior, right?
I think so. That's what I prefer, and the feedback I get from people. I have part of my ministry here at the church I'm a pastor at is I bug people all the time. Do you have a physical Bible you actually read and interact with? And I have extras, and I try to get, I'll go to different websites, try to catch what's on sale to find good study Bibles that people will want to interact with. I'm a huge proponent of that, simply because, like I said, the power goes out. A book, you step outside in the sunlight and you can still read your Bible.
Yeah. Sorry, my Bible's not charged.
Yeah.
Maybe.
I mean, I know a lot of people do it and they do it right. They interact with it, but I try to encourage people, do it, interact with it, resonate with it. Like, your screen won't lock up because you're just turned to a page. But this is where I'm an old man. You're an old man on everything else. I'm an old man on everything.
I was about to say, well. Look who's coming back. An old man. Come on, come to daddy.
Nah. You take 2 steps back, big boy. All right.
Yeah. And then if you want to get conspiracy theoried on it, right? Like anything that's digital can be altered.
Well, don't even go down that rabbit trail.
Just like, they say that's one of the for the 3 people that listen to this that have ever played a video game, which maybe less, maybe just me and you. That's one of the things that there's been times where people just download the games and then they get taken down, and it's very rare, but like that's why there's a big argument of, well, should you just have everything digitally or should you buy physical copies? Yeah. Physical copies can't be altered or taken away. I mean, they can be. They'd have to physically come take them, but digital, it's easy to remove things and take things away.
Fahrenheit 451, Ray Bradbury.
So there's your conspiracy theory.
Oh, baby.
With your silly question.
I'll
start adding conspiracy theory of the week as well as silly question.
Don't do that. No. We'll get people now. That'll attract a crowd. We'll just disappoint them.
I saw a Bigfoot.
A Bigfoot.
All right. So let's move on to this week's topic. So there's my silly question. Not so silly. I think it was a great question.
Wow, I'm actually
another great question.
A little disappointed, but yet relieved at the same time.
I think my next, I got another one. I've been
requested to punch you in the throat when I see you for how dare you cut down Crocs the way you have.
Listen, I can abide a lot of things. Crocs in church is not one of them. I just can't. So,
old man yelling at cloud.
And listen, I've heard the argument. I heard it off camera earlier that, Jesus didn't wear nice fancy shoes and he was barefoot a lot of the time. Well, if you can get in those Crocs and walk across the water into church, then you can wear them, man. Yeah,
whatever.
Hat tip to George Steinbrenner for that. But all right, so let's get to this week's topic. Speaking of walking on water, what a segue. So when I asked you earlier on an earlier episode, kind of what order you would read the Bible in, and you said you would start with the Gospels, go to the New Testament, and then go to the Old Testament last, and that's where I made my great observation about the prequels and the Old Testament being a much better prequel than the Phantom Menace.
Lord.
But
and we're down to one.
Right. Super niche audience now. But so you said you start with the Gospels. So why would you start there? And then let's talk about them. So today we're going to get in a little bit more in depth about kind of why you start there, and then some of the differences between maybe why there's these 4 were kind of the what the early church decided on as kind of the definitive versions, and then we'll kind of go into some of those questions. So first, why do you start there?
You start there because the Old Testament points forward to Jesus. The Gospels are about the life of Jesus. And the New Testament, the rest of the New Testament, I should say, even though the Gospels are the introduction to the New Testament, the rest of the New Testament points back to Jesus and points forward to his return. So to me, if you're just going to start with the Old Testament, it's going to build a lot of good background, but you read it differently when you understand who Jesus is and his life and what it is he has done significantly. So I'm a fan of that because it is Christ who saves and it is Christ who we are called to learn about. And we are called to be his disciples. So you start there with him.
That's and simple. If if you only had to read one thing, you'd want it to be the gospel, right? Like one of the gospels, right? That's the kind of,
right.
That's kind of what our whole thing's kind of based around, right? It's not based around the Old Testament. So, all right. So let's talk. So there's 4 gospels. I think everyone listening knows that.
Yep. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John.
Okay, so why were those chosen? So why were those 4 chosen? They're written differently. Some of there's obviously crossover, but no pun intended.
So let's get on the same page with the language, and let's get on the same page about the audiences. So the Matthew, Mark, and Luke are known as the Synoptic Gospels. That's what they're known as. They share a lot of the same stories, recollect a lot of the same events, but they are told from 3 different perspectives to different audiences. And we know that because we can see how that was laid out at the beginning in the introductions of their gospels, and I'll go through that in a little bit. John's gospel is its own odd standalone. It presents Jesus pre-incarnate. So when they say in the beginning, they're actually quoting Genesis in the beginning. So before time was made and before creation, that same wording of in the beginning. They're talking about how Jesus is eternal, and he was referred to as the Word, the Logos in the Greek. So in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And so that sets this precedence of this is fully God, then fully man. The other 3, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, present fully man, fully God. Again, same thing, just from a different view. And they were written to 3 different audiences because it's not like the Bible was being walked around. The whole Bible that we have today was not being walked around following the life of Jesus or during the life of Jesus. In synagogues, there would be much of what we would call the Old Testament, the teachings. Jesus himself quoted out of Isaiah and Psalms a lot. On the cross, he actually quotes Psalm 22. A lot of people don't realize that. And so the education they had was from the Old Testament, but they didn't have all this together like we do today. And so there was the life of Jesus recalled and documented to different audiences based off of people's education and what they needed to know about Jesus. That makes sense.
And I think we touched on it earlier, but like Matthew was written for more of a Jewish audience, and one of the kind of telltale signs is the genealogy at the beginning.
So one of the things you'll hear about Matthew and Luke, Matthew is written to a Jewish audience, and we know that because in the genealogy that's presented, it's actually the genealogy of Joseph, who is not the biological father of Jesus, but that is Jesus' adopted father. And even in the beginning of Matthew's gospel, the angel who talks to Joseph spells out to him, you will name him Jesus. Because in Jewish tradition, by Joseph naming him, he automatically adopts him in with the same rights and privileges as a biological child. So his genealogy is...
And that's important to the Jewish audience to tie him to the line of David.
Absolutely.
Right.
Luke, on the other hand,
that's the tying him to David, right, is important to a Jewish audience just because of prophecy and things like that.
Right. Luke, on the other hand, actually goes through the genealogy and lineage of what his biological mother, Mary. So thus saying he wasn't necessarily adopted into being Jewish. He was born Jewish, but he was not biologically conceived. He was conceived of the Holy Spirit, but he did have human lineage and DNA, so to speak. So that introduction right there between those two brought validity to, hey, here is the supernatural understanding of his conception and birth. And Luke was written by a Gentile. Luke was a Gentile. He was also a physician, and he was very brilliant. As a matter of fact, many of the documents that have been dug up and researched, he is considered one of the top historians of that time by archaeologists who look at it. And his gospel has validated and turned many people who were once atheists to the faith because of how well he recorded things. But he wrote his gospel to a Gentile audience. Matthew's gospel points back to the Old Testament a lot of what we would say is messianic prophecy, prophecies about the Messiah that is to come. And so when we would read about a miracle, we would see in Matthew's gospel, as the prophet once said, and they would point back and quote an Old Testament passage, and it reiterates to a Jewish audience that prophecy you've learned about your whole life. This is how Jesus fulfilled it. Where Luke's gospel does point to that, but it goes into even more detail to explain, because a Gentile would not have had the same kind of understanding education as a Jew would have at that time,
and
about
wasn't
the Messiah.
Isn't another, like, the way Luke writes is more in like the Greek tradition of historical writing, like recording history and things like that, right? Isn't that kind of part of his thing too?
Well, you have to remember all the Gospels and the whole New Testament was written in Greek. It was all written in Greek. So the writing styles, as far as how we read it, are on point, and it's why it sticks to us so well. And when we, in the next episode, when we go through the New Testament, I'll explain all that as well. You have to remember, at that time, Greek was the most widely accepted language for writing in the world. And so culturally, there was still a lot of diversity. The Jews had their traditions, they had their beliefs, but as far as writing goes, there's a reason why things make a lot more sense to us when we start in the Gospels. We go, okay, I don't necessarily understand that in Matthew's gospel, what they're pointing to there, but obviously it's a big deal. You can put two and two together. Versus, I would say, in the Old Testament, when we read apocalyptic literature and all this imagery about the destruction or judgments, and you're like, what is going on? The wrath of God. Here we are given a little bit better context and world building into what's happening. So Matthew's gospel is written to a Jewish audience. Luke's gospel is written to a Gentile audience. John's gospel, and I'll get to Mark and that significance in a little bit. John's gospel, like I said, he's pulling from imagery that he understood because he is Jewish. He uses Jewish imagery. He talks about prophecy being, he's a little all over the place, but he's not necessarily pinpointing to one specific audience. It's a very broad spectrum. So if you're Jewish, you would understand certain things. If you're a Gentile, it would have been fine. But his ultimate objective is to present the deity of Christ. That's his ultimate objective. Where the other three do identify that, John comes out swinging with that. The most interesting one, and what people don't realize, is out of all of them, probably the most controversial at the time was Mark's gospel. Mark's gospel was written to a Roman audience. And it starts with a statement of choosing violence. I want to read it to you. It says, Mark 1.
Is that a physical copy?
Was that? Oh, yeah.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah. Oh.
He practices what he preaches.
Oh, yeah. I have had it turned and ready to go. Mark 1, verse 1. The beginning of the gospel of Jesus Christ, the Son of God, That was hot. That was a hot take. Hot take. You want to know why?
Why?
Take a guess. There it is. You don't want to take a guess? Why would that statement be so controversial to a Roman audience? You looked so unamused. To the people who actually watch this, the lack of enthusiasm is how he normally looks, by the way.
Well, I'm not one of these guys that thinks daily about the Roman Empire, so I'm not. I'm sure that is it undermining Caesar?
So the belief, there you go. See, he lied. He does think about the Roman Empire every day.
I read your notes.
Well, burst the bubble there. I was actually excited for a minute. Never mind. He's staying in the moron lane. It's okay.
I actually prepare for this.
You prepared. Oh, wow. Okay. Good for you. Good for you. Good for you. So back then, it was professed that Caesar was the son of God. And one of the reasons why there was so much controversy is a Roman audience would have read that statement right out of the gate and it would have gone, oh, this guy's challenging Caesar. Because what people don't realize, when Christians were getting massacred and persecuted under the Roman Empire later, when Jerusalem would be destroyed in 70 AD, excuse me, Rome wasn't mad that they worshiped Jesus. They were mad that Christians refused to take a knee and bow to Caesar, that they bowed to Christ alone. And so that statement right there in the Gospels, when you see that, there's a reason why there's no genealogy acknowledged, because a Roman audience, they don't care about that. That doesn't matter to them. They were wired in a way where they wanted to get straight to the action. They wanted to know, what are we dealing with? So that's one of the reasons why we read about Jesus getting right into his ministry. We don't read about his parents. We don't read at the beginning. It immediately gets into the action. And so that's why Mark's gospel was very hot and controversial, because the opening statement itself was just a shot at Caesar. So
that was something I've heard, right? Or didn't read it, so I'm not gonna say I read it, but I heard somebody talk about in the early days of the church. That's how they would identify Christians. Is there was you could get a pass of sorts to basically be able to buy and sell things, but to get that pass, you had to come and say Caesar is Lord, which is a direct contradiction, obviously, for if you think Jesus is Lord. So many Christians wouldn't refuse, and so they couldn't buy or sell things. So they were kind of put on the outskirts of society. So Caesar is Lord was the thought. I mean, the salad's good, but it's not that good.
Yeah.
Right. So how did my question would be, so you've kind of identified kind of the audience they were written for. How is there an order you like to read them in, or is there, how do they interact with each other, the individual gospels?
Honestly, for us today, there's so many resources to learn the context of it. It's even today, I got older folks in our church that love the fact that they can put that together. But again, I love John's gospel. John's gospel to me is the one everybody should start with, to understand the significance of the deity of Christ, right? That sets a precedence. It documents everything well. There's even a little humor in there, especially on resurrection morning, where John refers to himself as the disciple Jesus loves, like I'm his favorite. And he documents that he beat Peter there. He wants that to be known. It's very petty, and I love it from that standpoint of, he's making known, we were running, and I can read it in Donald Trump's voice too, and that makes it even funnier. I'm the disciple he loved.
It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter who's the fastest.
I won the
I'm just saying,
there.
Doesn't matter who's fast. I'm just saying I am faster.
I'm fast. I mean, who's faster than me on that morning? No one.
No.
So I just, that one I would say to anybody, if you want to get the scope of the significance of Jesus and you don't understand anything else about the Old Testament, if you're starting a new, start with John's Gospel. And I am personally slanted towards Matthew's Gospel. I enjoy that. I enjoy it because for me, and this is me, this is my preference. I'm not telling you superior. I know pastors that love Mark's Gospel or they love Luke's Gospel, and they have their reasons for it. For me, I love Matthew's Gospel because I am a Bible nerd who loves the connection to the Old Testament. And when I read through the Old Testament later and I see all the breadcrumbs that lead to Jesus, it's awesome to see that puzzle come together. I enjoy that. It all wraps up in ties.
Which would you pick for someone totally new to the faith? Like somebody that
John's Gospel.
John's
Gospel.
Right.
John's Gospel.
Okay.
If you walked up to me and said, you can only pick two, and it's for new believers, John's Gospel, start with John's Gospel, and it's a toss-up between Luke's Gospel and Mark's. Mark's gets right down to it. Luke's Gospel starts off a little slow, but the thing with Luke's Gospel is it recounts what we call the Christmas story, the birth of Christ, the Word incarnate. So now you have that depiction added in there, where Mark's Gospel just gets straight to it. So maybe because of that, I would say start with John's Gospel and then Luke's Gospel.
So Mark's Gospel is just, you kind of categorize that as, it should be read as somewhat defiant, right? Like
I wouldn't say the whole thing has to be read as defiant. The very beginning is setting a precedence.
Yeah. Okay.
That this is again, think about it. This is where you have to remove yourself from your time and look at the culture then. It's setting this precedence that no, this isn't just some other religious figure. This is not Zeus. This is not Apollo. This is not some other god. This is standalone.
And he's got staying power.
Yeah. Like this is who Caesar should be taking a knee to.
Yeah. Final question on this. Why, I guess this could kind of encapsulate a bunch of different topics, but why were these four the chosen four? You talked about that they speak to different audiences. Is it as simple as like these were first the things that could be somewhat verified as firsthand eyewitness accounts and others couldn't be?
So that's a whole rabbit trail in itself. So
I know that's kind of a big
topic, it's a big one. But these were eyewitness documented accounts, recollections. Luke was not a disciple, but he was a historian and a documenter. He traveled with Paul. He documented. He would take these things and put them together. There was accountability in documentation. And there was consistency in documentation as well. Some of these other air quote gospels, when they look at the earliest dating of them, were many years, decades authored after the life of Jesus, where these were things being recollected and documented and being taught and passed around, not documented during the time of Jesus, but also being passed around afterwards and being pointed to. Because again, Matthew's Gospel, you want to see that recollection of how Jesus fulfilled Old Testament prophecy, especially post-apostle era. The men who walked with Jesus could recollect and point to, but these things were documented and accounted for with eyewitness accounts, where some of the other air quote gospels were written with, in some cases, Gnostic flavor, I would say. And the Gnostics believed, again, oversimplification, that Jesus didn't die, that maybe he blacked out or he went into a coma or he suffered so much the pain. But if he really is God, he can't die. And the Gnostics also kind of portray God as almost like a bad guy, and it's just a whole different view. And so a lot of these other gospels that were denounced, like, no, that's not valid, but they try to pin other names to them. Their roots and documentation don't align with what other eyewitness accounts and the apostles and others who actually walked with Jesus. So
yeah, and like we may talk about it, but if you're looking for a resource on like kind of this topic in particular, I think Wesley Huff did a "Can I Trust the Bible?" and it shows some of the. It's really cool just looking at just something as simple as the names being used.
Yes,
and how there's some gospels, quote unquote, but the names are all of these are all 3rd century Egyptian names that are used, and then. Well, when was that gospel found? Well, 3rd century Egypt. So it's like it's probably written then, whereas the other ones use names of the region of the time. So, so that's a really cool resource. So, all right, so that's kind of a quick look at the gospels, kind of what each one, kind of the frame or the kind of the mindset of the writer, somewhat the audience, how they interact with each other. We're going to talk next week about somewhat of the rest of the New Testament, how you can look at that. And then we'll end with the Old Testament, and we'll move on from kind of reading the Bible into some other questions. We've gotten some really good ones from people. If you have a silly question, send that in. We are on Twitter/X at Crushing Canaan. Nathan's got a website, Bible Context Matters. You can find the podcast on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcast. Leave a like, subscribe, all that good stuff. Share it with your friends so we can grow. We're hoping to reach as many people as we can.
And I'm adding a little something to it, a little razzle dazzle for you. A little his eyebrows went up. See, I got surprises for him too, folks. I'm not the punching bag. I have a blog now on the website.
I thought you were going to announce a giveaway, but all right, a blog.
Giveaway. Right. What am I giving away? I give away knowledge. Not good now, but whatever.
It's free. That's true.
You're the one.
All right, so the blog at BibleContextMatters.com.
Yeah, the Rant Fahim. Just me ranting. I get to rant.
Well, there you go. Check out his rants at BibleContextMatters.com. Episodes are also posted there. But like I said, wherever you're listening to this, but we're also if you want to watch, we're on YouTube. You can see just our beautiful offices behind us and our lovely faces. So join us on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, and you can interact with us on X, or you can email us at crushingcanaan@gmail.com if you have questions or comments. We'd love to hear from you. So thank you for listening. We'll be back next week.